Many towns in D&D are just some town. Maybe there's some cool characters there, or a head-scratch-worthy dilemma, or a fascinating quest that the party can sink their teeth into, and all of this is often more than enough. However, today we are creating a place that in itself is beholden and affected by a rather raucous gambit, which is sure to spice up any general party shenanigans or quests which happen to occur here. The write-up of this town, its map, the various quests which occur here, and a ton of other content are all available on my Patreon, so go there if you want access to those, or if you just want to support the channel, and thank you so much to everyone who already has. Now, before we invented the wickedy wild magical tomfoolery which would exist in this town, we were designing it to be just some simple town, placing the centerpiece clock tower, outlining possible neighborhoods, and figuring out some background lore. Is this a good source of trading or market? I think it absolutely is. I think being much more trade focused, and you wrote fishing or agriculture, I think they could definitely be a bit more fishing, and maybe that's where their like past is a little bit, but I think there can be a bit more of a recent surge of trade. This prominent architectural feature would need some explanation, and this is our first foray into the town's gambit. But the question is, what is this clock tower? That is one of our big questions. Maybe the clock tower is almost religious in its symbolism, like only markets are open at a certain time, and if it stops, trading stops. Ooh. Something that this town can have a little bit of, I think. The Horn of Radigan is currently undergoing a revolution, and to me, this clock tower screams like, maybe that's like, it's a connection to some of the sort of older traditions, right? Rather than some of the fresher, newer ones. We'd build off this, so we'd have the historical community of this town being a bunch of religious traditionalists who entirely adhere to the clock's bell ringing. Meanwhile, the newer revolutionaries who have immigrated into the Horn of Radigan in the recent decades don't have the same beliefs, and see the clock's power as significantly hamstring the town's potential, especially when it comes to becoming a mercantile behemoth. I didn't want these groups to be massively opposed though, so we'd make both of them for the revolution. As I sometimes do, I would look at real-world cultural phenomena to guide our perspective on these dynamics. And this sort of dialogue is Spain, because it's like Spain, say, will have siestas, like very commonly. And siestas are obviously like terrible for your economy. And a lot of like modern economists are like, guys, the Spanish economy is in the fucking gutter, especially after Franco and his like brutal fascist regime. And they're like, we need to modernize, we need to get it going. We got to get rid of siestas. And people are like, it's the Spanish way of life. And I think this can be a similar thing where they can have the clock tower as traditions. And some people are arguing like to become an economic powerhouse in the region, they need to sort of embrace a more free-flowing market, and other people are like, that may be correct, but the clock tower dictates, as you've just written, gambling times, when they can trade, and all of these things like that. And I think maybe that can be a bit of the tension in the town. At this stage though, the town's lore was at the forefront, but from here on out, we'd start truly amplifying the town's gambit. Starting off after Ruined Mirage suggested that maybe they could only gamble from 2 AM to 5 AM. And from here, chat would take this idea and run with it. If we're going for kind of crazy rules, which we are, why not a town dress code for citizens and strict codes of conduct for visitors? Absolutely, fuck it, why not? Absolutely, that is incredible. This would be the early foundations for the future gambit the town would be known for, a fastidious rule following dictated by a clock tower. This stringentness would bleed into how we'd build our districts. And this, I think, could maybe be much more pocketed architecturally, where it's like, oh, the Oasis Sanctuary people, like you guys, you use those building types, okay? You have to build over here. I don't know, the Gilded Fang, you guys have these building types. You're forced to build over here. The rest of the towns build here, and it being very architecturally pocketed as sort of a tradition of the town, I really like as an idea. To build off that stringent dress code and stuff. While we wrote out some information for our two groups, the Bell Ringers and Clockwinders, we discussed a name for the town, giving it two options. A goofy choice of Tickety Time Town, and a more proper but not really much better name of Clockbellia. During this though, we'd further refine the clock's influence. Could maybe have been created years and years ago in the past by a magical person, and it rings at arbitrary times during the days. Like, it isn't consistent. The traditionalists are like, it does these consistent bell rings, you know, 2 bells is when we can start gambling, and 2 bells again after that is when we stop. And sometimes those are 5 minutes apart, sometimes they're weeks apart. And if they're weeks apart of gambling or no gambling, that's what we do. And then one ring means like that's when we can trade, and it might happen at 3:30 in the morning, and it might be for a 10-minute window. But if it's for a 10-minute window, we all get up and we do our trade, and they're sort of beholden to this entirely random bell ringing that happens. And the newer revolutionaries are like, that's a fucking insane system. What are we talking about? Sometimes it doesn't ring for months, and we're not allowed to fish for months at a time because the bells? What the fuck are you talking about? So I like the idea of the bells dictating what they do. And we can actually figure out maybe like 5 or 6 different bells, rings, that dictate 5 or 6 different things. So when the party come into the town, there's going to be some things they're allowed to do and some things they're not. I like the idea of like, there's a set of rules that are either on or off, and you just have to abide by them depending on the bell ring. As we engaged in some good old-fashioned chin-wagging over the whole thing, we decided that adherence to the bell would be religiously derived. Over 1,000 years ago, the tower was created by a time god who spoke to the locals in the town, explaining its power and how it worked. This time god hasn't returned since, but they are believed to live in the clock tower, a building many have entered, but none have ever exited, a concept which gets its own quest and video. During this discussion, a visual representation for the clock came into being. I also thought of an idea for the clock. So the clock can be more than just like a regular clock, where I think it can be like, say we're going to have 12 rules that they follow. It can have like 12 different sort of like arches or whatever, like grooves in it. And the different the clock is like tracking how long any single rule has been on or off. And it's like when the bell rings, that part of the clock resets and then it goes. So you can like look up and see how long you've been following rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, rule 4, rule 5. So on. At this point, we'd put a substantial pause on the dialogue about this dear clock and its mysterious bell ring, which had been blossoming thick and fast, but was still far from done. Instead, we'd reorient our attention to the map's design, where I'd go back to a technique I'd recently started using a lot, where I have lots of pockets of buildings of varying size, everywhere from 1 to 8 or so. The reason I do this is because I found it results in more natural looking town development. While fumbling around putting down buildings, I'd also incredibly uncertainly decide to really divide the town. What we're gonna do is we're gonna have like the older town be entirely on this side of the road, and they've built down, and then everyone, no, that doesn't quite make sense. I think they would be on the, no, maybe it is. Maybe it's like they're entirely here and the other people, all the immigrants are on like the other side of the road. I think that's what we're gonna do. I'd also adopt a method I used for Light Breach where we create a green wall to further visualize the divide. Hedges could be interesting. We're gonna have that segregation. We're gonna have that divide between the town. These people are gonna be a little bit finicky, and they've gonna created a hedge wall to block people out. We can do that. Then we can have like a path there, and then we can start again. And then I can copy and paste it because that exists as a function on a computer. I don't have to do it individually. Alex, you genius. You remembered copy and paste. Wow. When did I get so fucking swole-brained? When did my brain become so massive as to remember copy and paste? I don't know. We'll get those trees. Kind of similar to what I've done here, but I had bushes there. Very similar design. I think this can be very much inspired by Light Breach. Yeah, I'm loving using these hedges as well, and they're just something different. Like just using different stamps is something I'm always trying to do. Looks good. Thank you. Appreciate it. And we'll like map the road to it a bit more specifically. Happy with this hedge placement, I'd also use it in front of the clock, creating a grandish walkway, really demonstrating the care and respect the townspeople have towards their precious clock tower. As the southern part of the map was getting designed, we'd remember the potential blooming of a trade empire and build some docks. I think filling out this water as well is going to be important, right? Because it's like, otherwise we just have like a massive negative space at the bottom of this map here. And I think having this like elaborate port system is going to be fun. And I've never done that before. And it's just, I think, going to be a little bit of an intermingling, winding mess. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. I really like that as a pier system. I can see people fishing off between those two piers. Yeah. And let's actually get some people. I've been getting people on the map a little bit more consistently, and I think it's looking pretty good. We're obviously not going to have any people that are like fishing. So, we are going to have to kind of go through with what we've got. This guy's got a shovel. I like that. We'll chuck them there. Oh, great. This is a piratey looking person. Oh, perfect. Oh, that's amazing. Yes. You can be here. Moving back north, chat suggested that we add some hills/cliffs to give the town more verticality, which was a great suggestion, and as we would often do, we'd then utilize the place geography to narrativize the town's design. But I think really separating these sections by cliffs is going to be the play of the day, right? Where it's like, well, why have they only made it down here? And the answer can be because this is all cliffs and it's just a little bit harder to actually make places, like to build a town up there, and they've sort of neglected it. And now these people have come in and they're like, yeah, that's fine, we can use that space. As I was refining the dirt patching around the houses and roads, I would come to the realization that maybe it was time to change my approach to map making to adjust to my already changed style. In the future, I think what I'll definitely do is I'll just place the houses down first and then I'll build the roads towards them. And I've been putting down these patches and these houses down and the roads down first, but I think that was like more for my old style where I wasn't as specific and I didn't have these little neighborhoods. And I've sort of been creating it in a way which makes sense when I was doing the old style a lot more. But now that I've changed up how I make towns and how I approach neighborhoods, I don't think it's going to make so much sense for me to continue doing that. And that's like a good thing to recognize, and it's a good thing to learn, and it's a good thing to be like, oh, okay, cool. Well, in the future, I'll do that. And that's how I've gotten better at map making. This would bring most of the building and infrastructure placement to a close. So we'd go through and do the classic sweeping additions we often do at the end of maps, placing mainly trees, but also scattering in some farms as well, making the whole town look a bunch better and leaving it mostly complete. And so we'd return to our Gambit, where we'd really zone in and figure out exactly how the clock tower and its influence functions. To jump off, Chad and I would simply brainstorm 12 things that could be allowed or prevented. Most of these 12 would be pretty simple and classic things, such as drinking, boinking, etc. But I would still be very purposeful in which I selected and which I wouldn't. The reason I don't want to do eating is because I don't want it to be anything where it's like, if it fails, then they will die, right? Like, I don't want it to be like, well, they can't do that. It should be more of an inconvenience than anything. On top of these standard ones, I wanted to add a few funky ones into the mix, such as being required to wear a ceremonial waistcoat and clogs. And honestly, we could probably have a lot more fun with it and have more wacky, crazy ones in the mix. To add a little flavor to the whole affair, I wanted to create 3 categories that the various rules would sit, landing on personal, communal, and societal. This wasn't too important, but something that would be is figuring out the specific rules of this. I wanted to keep it really simple and enforceable, deciding that it would be a pure binary system. If the rule is on, the thing is allowed, and if it's off, then it's not allowed. This should make it very easy to implement in game and doesn't bog the concept down with people trying to understand the minutiae of how it works or when it's applied. In some cases, I think it'll also lead to the NPCs acting in interesting or nuanced ways, could lead to the party being used as intermediaries, and of course is rife for good roleplay opportunities. And like they're interacting with the NPCs and they're like, this is what I found out. And the people are like, no, you can't tell me new information. I can give you information, but you cannot give me information. I think could be like a fun dynamic for this quest where like the NPCs just outwardly are refusing to be informed of anything new, or at least the religious ones. Could be fun. To really fill this out, we'd go through and discuss which rules would be active and which ones wouldn't be, also giving them a time period for how long they'd been in their current state. Visiting friends and family. I think that could be off, because that could be like an interesting thing of like, the party need to like actually interact with some of the other NPCs because they're not allowed to visit them, and they're like, that's actually my friend, I'm not allowed to visit them at the moment, I'll see them in a little bit. So that could give like an impetus of like, a big question we often have in quests is, it's like, why do the party need to like go talk to these NPCs? Don't they just talk to each other? And in this case, like, no, religiously they cannot, they're not allowed to. At this point, the rings didn't really mean anything. They just represented where they appeared on the clock face and how many times the bell rang when their corresponding rule was turned off or on. But chat would suggest having the ring number represent their severity, so we'd reorder them in correspondence to this. Definitely some of these are worse than others. So maybe say politics is like a 1 ring. Fishing is maybe like 3 ring. Trading can be like 10 ring. Visiting friends and family can be like a 9 ring. And these are like the levels of offense. So maybe people do just cop politics. They do, and maybe they do fish a little bit because they don't think it's the worst thing. While trading is like an absolute no-go. And visiting friends and family is also sort of like pretty off limits.
Okay, I really like that as a concept. So we'll go through and we'll change these.
We were getting close, but one of the last questions we need to answer was what are the actual consequences for breaking the rules? Both in an in-world perspective, but also from a meta D&D perspective.
Get really bad luck or whatever if you start to disobey. And then there can be those that are like super superstitious or like the revolutionaries that they're like, I don't actually believe in the bad luck. Like, I don't care. Bad things happen to me, but they're like, that's coincidence or whatever. And for the party, like you could have it be bad luck. And it's like every roll, like if they do something wrong, every roll they make is at disadvantage. Like they straight up just have disadvantage on every roll.
This would evolve to become if you are currently breaking any of the rules, then all of your skill checks and attack rolls are inflicted with a negative modifier equal to the ring's number, with only the modifier of the worst offense being applied. For example, if you're breaking the rules for rings 3 and 7, then you get a -7 to all your rolls.
So let's look through and see what is going to affect the party. So this, I think, forces them to wear the clogs at all time. Funny. This means they can't do any personal hygiene the whole time they're in the town. Also funny. Learning is off. That's going to be the next one that can affect them. So while they're going through the quest, they have a -7 modifier on things. Ooh, maybe a bit extreme.
Having the modifier apply for the whole quest was way too encompassing, so we'd need to refine when it would count and when it wouldn't. In reference to how this affects learning, but this would be true for all the rules, the negative modifier would only apply if the party were currently breaking the rule. So the party would only receive a negative modifier if they were in the process of reading something new, having a conversation where they're finding out new information, or making mental deductions. This would not apply though if they were using a piece of information they'd previously learned. I also think this is applied situationally and not second by second. So if the party are having a drink, they have de facto bad luck the whole time, not just during the moments they are literally drinking, lips to the glass, liquid sliding down their throat, thirst being quenched, sobriety being lost. However, if they stop, then they're all good, even if they are still drunk. Reasonably though, some people thought the ring numbers modifier being applied was too extreme, so we'd make it the ring's number rounded up and make a table for it. Conversely though, some people really enjoy the intensely punitive nature of the original system as it truly forces the party to follow the rules, so we'd write down both as options. I really like the idea of the party constantly having to battle through negative modifiers, giving them the ultimatum of lessening these impacts if they buy into the religiosity of the town, or if they choose to stay stubborn, then they'll suffer the consequences. On top of this, some of these effects, like visiting friends and family or fighting, might be very difficult to avoid, and seeing how the party try to worm their way out of these could lead to some top-tier ingenuity. The last question to answer is how this entire idea is presented to the party. I wanted all of this to be super forthright, where we'll have a religious NPC immediately greet the party as they enter the town, giving them a pamphlet with the various rules written out, along with some communal clogs and waistcoats that they can wear to avoid bad luck. This gives a chance for the gambit to be fully explained, so the party can just have fun with it from then on out without being too confused about how it works, while also planting the plot hook of investigating the clock tower and doing its related quest. This would bring this town making and gambit discussion to an end.
I'm going to say it's done. I'm going to finish working on it for now. Super happy with it. I love, this little clock tower area and like what's become of all of this. We have our little markets. We have the town is very much delineated in the fastidiousness and rigidness. The older town, the people that sort of lived here before, they're all down on this area, and they've asked people to very specifically build these new districts, the revolutionary districts, in these areas where these guys are here, the eastern buildings are here, and the desert buildings are here, and you can sort of see them segmented very specifically. We have our sort of 4 districts roughly. We added cliffs, which really brought that dimensionality and dynamic and verticality to this map, which is great. And we put some boats and an interesting dock system. I think it looks good. And then on top of that, we've created this really fun, engaging clock tower system where, the party have to abide by different rules and regulations depending on what policies are active at any one time, which has this fun negative modifier gambit associated.
And that's the video. I think this town and its fun clock-based gambit is gonna be a great time. I'm super amped to get my party to deal with this whole conundrum. If you're keen to use this town map, want the write-up of the rules of the gambit, or want access to the multiple quest documents attached, then jump on the Patreon for access to these resources and many others. Follow us on the Twitch if you want to get your D&D brain impacting our quests and towns. It's always a ton of fun. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye!